feel so fancy. This is like a put together outfit with my little, I can't remember what this is called. Turtleneck. My little turtleneck and a little pinafore. I feel so fancy. I'm not really fancy. Hi, I'm Morgan. I talk about books, and today I'm talking about what I read in the month of October. Now, I did plan to read a bunch of like spooky Halloween books, but it didn't quite happen the way I wanted it to. I know I'm not the only person who has been struggling with lockdown and coronavirus and just life, and I'm also doing my dissertation, and it's just been a lot. So the fact that I read any books, I think, was quite impressive. And they were all kind of horror, thrillery, although I didn't get to read the ones I wanted to read, like my Stephen King and Nosferatu, but that's because they're all very long and very hard. And my brain wanted easy reads that I could basically just swallow whole. So that's what I've got to talk about. The first book I read was Alice Isn't Dead by Joseph Fink. It was a really good start to the month. It was very thematic. It had the vibes that I wanted, and I really enjoyed it, so I gave it 4 stars. This is the novelisation of the podcast of the same name. It follows a woman named Keisha, whose wife goes missing and is declared dead, but Keisha starts to spot her in the back of news broadcasts on the television and decides to go searching for her by becoming a long-haul trucker. I mean, there's reasons she becomes a long-haul trucker. That sounds completely out of left field, but yeah, that's what she does. Hence the beautiful truck on the front of the book. I absolutely love the aesthetics of the Alice Isn't Dead universe. It's so creepy, but it's in a quiet and underhanded way. It's not overly explicit. There's all these kind of little things that just make your skin crawl, and the book definitely had a lot of those. I also completely forgot how much actual horror and violence and like body horror was in the podcast. Like, compared to traditional horror, it's not like a lot, but I completely forgot it was there. So it was really fun to read and be like, oh, actual creepy body horror. It was a nice little surprise. I thought that the beginning of the book was a little bit slow, a little bit clunky. I don't know if that's because I had preconceived expectations or because Joseph Fink was just kind of finding his rhythm in writing the novelisation of a podcast, because obviously he did write the podcast, so trying to find the balance between the original story and how you need to write a novel. So I think it might, you know, I think that might have affected a little bit how the first couple of chapters were. That's not to say it was bad. I don't know, it just kind of, I felt aware that I was reading, which isn't always a good thing. But once that passed and it got into the meat of the story, I really enjoyed it and I did get absorbed by it. Like, I wasn't aware I was reading anymore. The character of the officer, I'm just going to call her the officer because she doesn't really have a name, is one of my favourite characters. Some of her episodes where she got to speak in the podcast, oh, they're my favourite. Like, there's whole chunks that are just like in my brain. They live there rent-free. And I was kind of sad that we lost some of her really good lines because she wasn't a narrator, but as a character she still jumped off the page and I loved her. I loved all her interactions with Keisha. It was just very exciting to read about her. On that note, we also lost some of the less relevant creepy locations and events that Keisha experiences in the podcast. And while I was disappointed with that, it did make sense that they were cut because it wasn't relevant to the overall story. It was just kind of nice aesthetic episodes where we got a sense of what Keisha was experiencing on the road, but there wasn't really room for it in here. It was nice that there was some little kind of hints and mentions towards these episodes. So someone who's listened to the podcast will be like, oh, that's referencing this specific episode, which I thought was quite nice. So, you know, we lost it without really losing it. Overall, I would recommend this if you're a fan of the podcast. I think it does do it justice. I probably still prefer the podcast, but I did really enjoy this. And I would recommend it even if you've never listened to the podcast, because it's just a nice, soft horror that focuses a lot more on the everyday horror of trying to make the world a better place while you're surrounded by people who literally do not care. I know people use literally wrong, but I'm using it correctly here. They literally don't care. Like, people are getting murdered by thistlemen and they're just like, oh, okay. And then they turn around. The next book I read was The Child by Fiona Barton. Unfortunately, I gave this 2 stars. I was so disappointed by this. So this is a kind of crime... Is it a crime thriller? I mean, technically, yeah, but it's a thriller. It's kind of a journalist-focused thriller where the remains of a baby are found in the garden of a set of flats that have been demolished, and journalist Kate Waters attempts to figure out what happened to the baby and who the baby is. I was mainly disappointed in this because I guessed the entire plot, including what I think was supposed to be like the twist, within the first 3 chapters. I knew exactly what had happened. I could have plotted it out from the first 3 chapters. I read the first 3 chapters and I could have plotted out the course of the entire book. I held on, hoping that there would be some kind of twist near the end, but there wasn't. I was really hoping that she'd made the plot obvious on purpose and then was going to bring in a really cool twist, but no. The writing itself wasn't bad, but it wasn't standout either. It was just, you know, normal, decent writing. I did like that we had a focus on Kate, the journalist, who is trying to unravel this mystery and is getting all of these people to talk to her about their lives from that time. And I think that the ending and the plot would have been a lot less obvious if we'd only heard from Kate. I think that including the other narrators really just killed off any surprise that was in the plot. I also found it really weird that only one of the point of view characters was written in first person. Everything else was written in third person. And the first person wasn't even Kate. Like, if it had been Kate, I might have kind of understood. I understand that playing around with point of view is a thing people do. I do it myself in my own writing, and it can be really interesting, but there seemed to be no rhyme or reason for it here. Like I said, if it had been Kate, I could at least have seen a reason for it. You know, this is the second book in a series. Presumably she's going to write more, I don't know. So if Kate was the first person point of view character in all of the books, that would make sense because she links them all together. But it was one of the other characters and I didn't understand it and it irritated me throughout the whole book. Honestly, I wouldn't recommend this. It was tedious and predictable, and there are plenty of other actually good thrillers out there. The next book I read was World War Z by Max Brooks. I gave this somewhere between a 3.5 and a 4 stars. I do round up on Goodreads. When it comes to that kind of thing, I try to round up unless it's like, I don't know, bad. So I think I gave it a 4 on Goodreads, but it is kind of in the middle, probably like a 3.75. I don't know, maths. This book is basically a fictional history of the zombie apocalypse. It contains interviews with people all around the world a decade after the zombie apocalypse is essentially finished. I already knew going in that the book was different from the movie, because I did watch the movie when it came out years ago, but I was surprised just how different it was. Like, usually when they're making a book into a movie, they don't change it that much, but that was a lot. There's practically nothing that links them together except the name. It's a completely different story. The only thing that stood out to me as being the same was the wall that Israel builds to keep the city in. Like, there's nothing else that stuck out to me as being the same. There probably was other small similarities, but they're completely different stories. So, I don't know, that surprised me and also kind of intrigued me. Made me want to read this more to figure out what was happening. There isn't a lot to say about character here because there isn't really a consistent character, so there's no consistent character growth. It's more about the history of the world, so if you like world building, this is definitely something that you would enjoy, and I did enjoy it because I do like a bit of world building. And if you enjoy like deep dives into the lore of a world, this is probably something that you'd like, because it's not just about the zombies, it's about how people reacted to it. And while I was reading it, I very much felt like it was just a reflection of our current pandemic. That was slightly disturbing because it's not a zombie apocalypse. And it felt like a lot of the things that Max Brooke was saying was kind of supposed to be slight hyperbole. Like, believable, but not exactly a reflection of the world. However, many of the interviews sounded exactly like something that would be said right now. So that was a ride. And as we all know, I love zombie media. So I did enjoy that it was just kind of exploring what Max Brooks thought would happen in an apocalypse. He's probably thinking, oh yes, I was correct right now. But aside from that, it just made my little zombie goblin brain happy. However, it wasn't perfect and I did have some issues with it. I think the lack of a kind of overall character arc of any character to hold it together is detrimental at certain points because there's no touchstone, there's nothing for the reader to hold on to, there's nothing to come back to, there's nothing to keep you reading apart from finding out what happens. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that they changed it in the movie. They gave us a character to focus on because most people prefer to have a character whose story we're following. So I did find that irritating at certain points. When I was bored with certain interviews, I'd be like, can we just move on? But, you know, I wasn't like, oh, if we move on, we're going to get back to this character. So at the same time, it didn't prompt me to keep reading. It was a weird kind of balance between wanting to read and not wanting to read. I also found that it fell into the use of a lot of stereotypes. I believe Max Brooks is American, correct me if I'm wrong, and because he was writing a lot of different cultures and countries, I think he did stereotype more than he should have. And I'm British, so I'm sure there's a lot of stereotypes that I missed also. That was probably the one thing that kind of annoyed me throughout the book. But also, where were the women? Like, there was just a lack of women. It was just men. So many men. And like, I get it was written in 2005. So like, there probably wasn't as many women in leadership positions as there is now. I mean, there's still not a lot, but you know what I mean. But like, it was still the 21st century. Women are capable of doing things. Like, we're a whole half of the population. We're gonna be involved if there's an apocalypse. So there was just kind of an overall lack of women, and the ones that were there, they didn't have as much power as the men that were talked about. I don't know, it just kind of disappointed me. You're creating this fictional apocalyptic world and you couldn't have written more women. I have class in like 3 hours. I specifically got up and put on a nice outfit so that I would record this video and then go to class, but I want to go back to my bed. I'm on my bed. I want to lie down on my bed. The next book I read was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I was very surprised by this. I gave it 5 stars because I fucking devoured it. I read it all in one day and kicked my reading slump in the face. This follows a girl named Pippa, or Pip, who decides to investigate the disappearance of a teenage girl for her final school project. I think it's a thing English people do in 6th form, but I don't know. We don't do that up here. I was very confused by it. Pip ends up teaming up with the brother of the boy that everyone thinks killed the missing girl, Andy, and they set out to find out the truth. So this is a YA thriller, and I don't think I've read anything like this before, and I was really surprised how much I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the writing, I enjoyed the characterisation. It was easy to read and understand, which I love. I loved Pip's relationships with her family and friends. I loved the way her and Ravi played off each other and worked well together and had this just kind of natural banter. And I actually really enjoyed the mystery as well. I did guess who did it, kind of. Or should I say, I guessed the first part of the twist, not the second part of the twist. But unlike with the child, I actually doubted myself and started to suspect other characters. So it made the mystery a lot more enjoyable. And I thought it was quite well written, especially for a YA mystery. It was easy to follow without being obvious. And I don't really want to talk a lot about the plot because knowing me, I'll just give away everything. But I did really enjoy all of it. I was enthralled and I just could not put it down. Would recommend. And the last book I read in October was The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. I ended up giving this 3 stars, but I did find it really hard to rate, so that may change. I don't know. So 25 years ago, in a big house in Chelsea, 3 dead bodies are found, all of them apparent suicides, and a perfectly healthy, cared for baby is also found on another floor of the house. Now this baby, who is Libby, is 25 and is inheriting the house and is trying to find out what happened to her and her biological family. I did enjoy this. It was well written and well plotted and overall easy to read, which is always a positive. This bit's kind of going to have some spoilers, so just a warning. The only thing about this book is that it really was not what I expected. I was disappointed that there wasn't more of a mystery going on, or, you know, something supernatural or something like that. Something more sinister going on in the background, because that's kind of what I expected. But the story itself was still good. It just was not what I expected from like the blurb and the cover and just kind of everything I've heard about it. I say everything I've heard, it's not a lot, but you know what I mean. This was what I wanted from Foxlow. So if you're looking for something insular and culty and showing that this kind of trauma stays with people, I would recommend this. If you, like me, were disappointed by Foxlow, I would recommend this. If you just liked Foxlow in general, I would recommend this. But don't go into it thinking there's going to be like something supernatural or like, I don't know, a serial killer or something, because that's not what it is. And those were the books that I read in October. If you've read any of them, let me know what you thought about them in the comments down below. And as always, if you've got any recommendations, I would love to hear them. You can come chat to me about books or, you know, anything else on my social medias, which will all be linked in the description down below. Twitter, Instagram, hell, even Goodreads, come say hello. I'd love if you could like, comment, subscribe, stay here with me and help me create a little book community. And if you've made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!